them to work, teaching them hard work. There's not many kids now that can know how to even use a shovel or an axe. That truck landed on me, it broke the ribs off of the front on the left side, under my arm, and off of my back. If it had been legal to kill somebody, they'd have killed me. Stay close to your parents, your family, because that's about all you have.
All right, welcome to the Rad Dad Podcast. This is episode 42. I have Glen Bair here with me. Glen, you are my wife's grandpa. So I guess we've known each other just about as long as Katie and I have known each other, which is over 10 years. But just to start off, tell me a few highlights from your childhood.
Well, as far back as I can remember, we grew up in a one-room house. It was small. It was probably, about maybe 12 by 12, if that big. And I had a little lean-to built on the back we used for a bedroom. And there was my little brother and myself and two younger sisters at that time. And my mom and dad lived in that one-room house. And my little brother and I slept together in a little single bed, and one of the little sisters would sleep with my mom and dad, and the other would sleep in a basket. And sorry about that.
Classic. I'm not taking that out of the episode.
There. Anyway, we slept in that single bed, and then we didn't have any electricity, no running water. We had an outhouse that was outside. And in them days, my mom, she had a coal cook stove, and she done everything on the cook stove. She hauled water from down lower on the ranch, and my dad had an old 41 Plymouth, and she'd take 10-gallon milk cans and haul the water in them milk cans from the well down there up to the house. But in the winter, we get so much snow, she couldn't get up and down the hill in the car, so she'd have to take a dishpan and go out in the yard and fill a dishpan with a plate and full of snow and then melt it on the stove. And she had... They didn't have throwaway diapers in them days.
Mm-hmm.
They had flannel diapers. So she had to wash them. So she tried to get us kids broke from diapers as fast as she could. we would take a bath on Saturday nights get ready for church the next day, and we'd always fight over who got to be first because we all had to use the same bath water. And she'd set a round wash tub in front of the cook stove on a chair where get it as warm as we could. I remember one time my little brother, he was in the bathtub, and he stood up and he got too close to the edge, and he tipped the tub over and splashed all the water out on the stove, and the steam rolled off. And anyway, and then when we'd have to go to the bathroom, we'd had to go out and go to the outhouse. But in the winter, you'd find lots of yellow holes in the snow around behind the house because me and Dale, we didn't want to go clear to the outhouse to go to the bathroom. But my dad, we had sheep there and dry farming. So, and then we'd get so much snow that my dad would drive the team of horses in a sleigh over the top of the fences and didn't even know where they were. And us kids would get sick, and we didn't have a telephone. And But down on the bottom of the ranch there, my grandma and grandpa had a telephone. And we'd be snowed in up there in the winter. And if we'd get sick, my dad would go call the doctor downtown, and he'd come as far as he could in his Jeep. And then my dad would have to ride his horse down to get medicine to doctor us with and that. And but that's kind of what and we lived there till I was old enough to go to school. And then my grandpa had another ranch down closer to town, so I moved to town with my dad with my grandma and grandpa and lived with them for a couple of years while I went to school. And then when my little brother got old enough to have to start school, and then my dad, he moved closer to town so that we could go to school. But I grew up in the sheep camp and around sheep. Grew up on a horse. I remember my dad I used to go with him, ride the horse, and I didn't have a saddle. I could reach the stirrups, and I'd follow him all day. And my rear end and my legs would be so sore I couldn't hardly walk from sliding around on the saddle, following him. But he used to take me and put me on the horse when I was 4 or 5 years old and tie a sack of salt behind this saddle, and I'd go up on the mountain and find my grandpa and take the salt to him so he could salt the sheep, and then he'd come down at night after he bedded the sheep, and I'd follow him down back home. But that's how I grew up until I was old enough to go to school.
Are there any skills you learned in your childhood that you still use to this day?
Oh yeah, later on we had a farm that, my grandpa had the farm, and then he sold it. My dad leased the farm. It was about 600 acres, and it was all flood irrigated and all dirt ditches. And I'll tell you, I got well acquainted with a shovel handle when I was a kid. I mean, I shoveled lots of dirt ditches, and we flood irrigated. We didn't have you never see a sprinkler in them days. But we had lots of water, and just learn to run the farm machinery. And I used to like to live at the sheep camp. I'd go spend the summers when I was younger, before I got old enough to have to do the irrigating and do the farming. When I was younger, before that, I'd go stay in the sheep camp with my grandpa and just run around the mountains with my .22, shooting rock chucks, and that's how I'd spend my summers. And then I'd have to come home and go to school. I didn't like to go to school.
They'd have to make you come home and go to school.
Yeah, I didn't like going to school, but they had to make me go to school. And
so where do you think your upbringing is so different than my kids will have? Where do you think the world's missing the mark on raising children?
Well, I think teaching them to work, teaching them hard work. There's not many kids now that can know how to even use a shovel or an axe or anything such as that. And they don't, they're not used to hard work. I know my grandpa, my dad's dad, he lived in Manti where we live, and his wife my grandma died, and then he married a lady from Ecuador or Costa Rica, and and they lived in her house. And she called me up one day and she says, you need to come over here. She says, your grandpa's gone crazy. And I says, oh yeah. And so I went over there and couldn't imagine what she was talking about. And I went in the house and I said, where's Grandpa? And she said, he's out behind the house. And so I went around there and he was standing in the hole about shoulder level with his shovel. And I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm digging a basement. The house didn't have a basement and he wanted a basement. And so he'd shovel the dirt out and he'd get in there and shovel the dirt. He made the hole deep enough so he could walk under the foundation. And so he started digging the hole. He'd throw it out and then he'd get out and throw it out of the way, And so he was shoveling it twice.
Yeah.
But, and he was 88 years old when he done that. And so I said, well, I'll come and help you. So I went over there after work at night and we'd dig for 3 or 4 hours. And then in the daytime, there were a lot of big rocks we run into. And then in the daytime, he would go over, he'd back his pickup up to that hole and we sloped it up so it was a ramp. And he'd string a cable with a tire chain. He'd put a tire chain around them big rocks and hook it to a cable and hook them on the back of his pickup. Drag him out in the yard, get him out of the way. Anyway, 2 or 3 weeks we had a basement dug under the house and he put a floor in it and studded the walls up and he had a basement. But them old boys then, that's just what they did. They didn't think about how hard it was. If they needed something done, they'd just do it. And they wasn't worried about the time and that. And that's what I grew up. I dug several, well, they might call them cesspools. It's where we had the sewer system. And when we got our house, I dug a hole 20 feet deep and 8 foot around, and I rocked it up with rocks like a well, what that hole was for is you drain the septic tank in it. And so I learned that from growing up, how to work like that, and it really didn't think nothing about it. And but you won't find kids that'll do that today.
Yeah,
they just don't do that.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot on the podcast, because in your time, it seems like you just worked hard to live. And nowadays, I'm like, how do I teach my kids hard work? Because we don't live on a sheep farm, but it's important to me that they learn it, right?
Yeah.
Because I was raised in a family where hard work is important. And I don't know, maybe we'll have to get some cows and sheep or something to teach Lincoln hard work.
When my little brother and I when we were kids, we farmed, we put up hay, and we didn't have no bale wagon or nothing like they got now. We picked the bales up out of the field, put them on the trailer, and then we'd haul them over and stack them by hand,
Mm-hmm.
And we used to make our little sisters go out and line bales for us so we didn't have to chase them so far. And but we didn't know any different. That's what we did. And this machinery they got now, it's awesome the way it works, but still we learned to work,
Yeah.
like that. And when John was just a kid, he wanted an axe for Christmas. And he, I don't know how old he was, 9 or 10 maybe. He wanted an axe for Christmas, a double-bitted axe. So I bought him a double-bitted axe for Christmas. And we had a wood pile out there. I went up on the mountain and cut quakies for firewood, and I just cut them the length of the truck bed, and then when I'd bring them down, I'd saw them up with a saw smaller. Well, on Christmas Day, he went out there and started using his axe. And he come in, he says, it ain't sharp. He says, it's dull. So we sharpened it, and And I mean, he spent hours out there chopping that wood. And when I think he was maybe 12, we needed some cedar posts, so we went and cut them cedar posts. And we cut them with an axe. We'd cut them in the winter because they're no good in the summer. But we'd cut them in the winter, and then when the snow would go, we'd go up and drag them out to where we'd get the truck to them and haul them home. Well, we'd ride up on the horses and take our axes, and we'd go cut cedar posts. And John, when he was 12 years old, he could almost match me post for post swinging an axe because I taught him how,
Mm-hmm.
And kids just don't see them do that today.
Yeah. Talk to me about any life or, I guess, close death experiences that you've had.
John, if you talk to John, he'll say he's watched me die several times. Oh, I've been around horses and mules all my life and had them. I remember one occasion I was riding my horse. I had my rifle on a sling. I carried a rifle all the time because of coyotes and stuff like that. But it was in the winter, and I was riding around a side hill. And the ground, it was froze. And the horse I had, he was good, but his back feet slipped, and he slipped downhill, and he started sliding down the hill on that steep hill, and he caught his back foot on something, and he flipped over backwards and landed in the bottom of the wash, and I was under him, and I was under him, and he was throwing his head trying to get up, and I was trying to keep him from beating me to death with his head, and I was laying underneath him on my back, and the ground had started to thaw right there, and I was laying in the mud. And so I finally got my gun out from under me and set it up on the bank, and then I squirmed back as far as I could and put my feet on the swells of the saddle and just gave a hard push, and I tipped the horse up on his feet, and then got up and cleaned the mud off, and took me an hour to clean my gun up, and I don't know why, but I wasn't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't hurt me, but that could have been bad.
Yeah,
because I know guys that got hit with a saddle horn in their chest here, it kills them, And then another time, I was out on the desert with the sheep, and we was getting ready to truck sheep home from the desert to get ready to lamb. And I got in the truck. We had a ton truck with a big heavy steel stake bed on it. It had a 500-gallon water tank in the back full of water that we used and for the camp. And anyway, I got in to go, and I noticed the clutch was out of adjustment, was way tight, and so I thought, well, I better adjust the clutch, or the sheep herder will burn the clutch out of this truck. So I went to slide under, and it was cold. It was in the winter, and the ground was frozen. I went to slide under, and I couldn't get under it because the frame was too close to the ground, so I got the handyman jack out, and I jacked it up a little, and I knew better than to get the wheels off the ground. I didn't need to only just raise it a little bit, so I just raised it, and just the springs raised up, and the wheels were still on the ground, so it couldn't shift and fall off the jack, because you just don't do that. And I got under there, and I adjusted the clutch, and I started to slide out, and I got right under the frame, and that thing dropped straight down, and the frame hit me right here. But it didn't pin me.
Was it crossbody?
No, it was lengthwise.
Oh my!
and the frame hit me right here, but it didn't pin me because the springs on it dropped, and the springs on the truck pushed it back up enough I could slide out. I couldn't figure out how in the world could it fall like that,
Yeah.
I couldn't figure it. Well, I climbed out and went around and looked, and the base of the jack that was holding it up, it broke through the frost and dropped about that far, just dropped down in the ground, broke through the frost. And, but anyway, I'd had broken ribs before, and I thought, this is a fright, I got broken ribs. But, so anyway, I worked the rest of the day, we corralled the sheep, and the next morning I went, we loaded the boss, he brought the semi out, and the next morning we loaded the semi full of sheep and started to pull away from the chute to let our loading chute down, and the truck just gave a lunge, the semi did, and there's, in the throwout bearings on them semis, there's a great big snap ring that holds the throwout bearing to the clutch. And that snap ring flipped off inside that clutch, and so we didn't have a clutch. So we put the sheep back up and unloaded the sheep and got the semi unhooked from the trailer. And one of the guys that was helping there, he knew how to drive trucks, so he drove that truck clear home from west of Black Rock, clear to Manti with no clutch. You run never stop, so I never stopped light till he had to come through because he didn't have a clutch. You get it in gear, and
Let's go.
And we started it in, put it in gear, and then start it, and then you could shift it, but you couldn't stop, Anyway, he got home, and that next morning, I tell you, I was hurting. I was hurting bad. And but I had to get that truck going. So I sent that guy down to Mason Diesel in Aurora to buy a clutch. And I took the farm tractor, and there's a cab over truck, so the transmission was back behind the cab. And I took the tractor with a loader on it and undone the clutch and slid it back. Anyway, I spent that next day putting the clutch in that semi and getting it going. And them ribs hurt so bad. So the next morning, I went up to the doctor, and he x-rayed me. And when that truck landed on me, it broke the ribs off of the front on the left side, under my arm, and off of my back. And anyway, I slept on the couch, couldn't lay down, couldn't lay in any position. I slept with and leaning against the back of the couch for 6 weeks. It took me to heal up. But I never missed no day of work.
I can't believe that.
I'd been shearing sheep, so I didn't have to shear no more sheep that spring because I had them broken
Got
ribs.
out of
that. That was a close one. But then John and I was up on the mountain herding sheep, and I was riding a sorrel horse, and he wasn't a bad horse. He was a little bit snaky, but he weighed about 1,200 pounds. And the creek kind of made an S turn there, and we rode down off this bank several times, and that's where we'd cross the creek. And I was in front of John. He was on the horse behind me, and we went down in the creek. And for some reason, that horse, he got down there, and he didn't want to cross the creek. And I worked him over the bridle reins, and he backs up the creek. He backs up that bank, and I couldn't stop him. He just backed right up, and there was a tree root sticking out about 6 inches off the ground. He hooked the back of his back feet on that tree root and flipped him over backwards off of that bank, and that bank was about, it's 6-7 feet high straight down into the creek. And I see what he was going to do, so I tried to push myself off to to get off of him. And I hit the bank and ricocheted back under him. And anyway, he landed on me in the creek. I landed on my back with him on top of me, and the saddle horn hit me on the side here on the side of my ribs, and didn't hit me here. It'd kill me, but it hit me on the side. And he fought, and he finally got rolled over and got up, and I got up out of the creek. I was soaking wet, and I had a pair of glasses on that busted him in two. And pulled my gun out of the scabbard on the saddle, and it came out in two pieces. And anyway, I felt weird as heck. I thought I didn't know what was the matter with me, but I knew something was the matter. So anyway, I got, the next morning, we got the sheep took care of, and the next morning it took me a half hour to get out of bed and put any clothes on. I mean, I could take steps about 2 inches long. Oh, they hurt. Oh, and I couldn't hardly walk and couldn't hardly breathe. And so anyway, we finally got between John and had some really good dogs. Between John and the dogs, we took care of the sheep there for a couple of days. And it was about second day after that, had gone up on the hill a little ways, and I was hurting. I mean, I was hurting. And I couldn't get out of there because it had been raining steady for several days, and we couldn't get out of there, and I didn't dare send John home by himself out of there. And so anyway, just had to stay up there. And so I was up on the side of the hill, and I thought, man, I got to do something, or I got to do something. So I kneeled down on the side of that hill, and I just told the Lord, I said, I'm up here, I got these sheep to take care of, and I need some help. The next day, and the day after that, I could feel myself I was still stiff, but the pain wasn't so severe. And it was about 5 days after the accident had happened, I was able to get on my horse again. And so I ended up staying up there the rest of the summer. And when I came down that fall, can't remember the occasion why I had to go, but I went to the doctor for something, and they x-rayed me. And I asked the x-ray girl, I says, what do you see? She looked at me and shook her head. She says, multiple fractures. And I busted my ribs and my pelvis, and
wow.
And my knee was about a foot wide for a couple of weeks. But anyway, that was a miracle, that deal.
Yeah.
But John, he always tells everybody he watched me die several times. Yeah. And then another time, he and I was up on the mountain and we was coming down a steep hill there, and there was kind of ledgy, and so I had my mule, and I had another one hooked on the saddle horn over the lead rope. And I was leading him. I was walking because it was steep there. And as sure-footed as they are, it's still kind of some places a pace to walk. But anyway, I was walking, leading that mule, and he was quite fast at going down rough stuff. And the other one behind him didn't want to go that fast. And so we started to go off of that ledge there, and that other mule hung back. He hung back, and the one I was leading tried to step, and when the other one hung back, it lifted that one's front feet up, and then finally the other one came down behind him, and the mule kind of lunged forward, and then both feet came over the top of my shoulders. Me and that mule went off of that ledge just head over heels. end over end, that mule rolling on top of me. And finally I got stopped, and he rolled a couple more times and slid in under a pine tree. And I stood up and found I had my pistol on the side, and I found my pistol and some other things that I'd had in my pocket that I'd lost. And then I went down to the where the mule was, and I turned him around. He got on his feet, and he seemed to be all right. And I wasn't really hurting. But John says, man, I didn't think you was going to get up from that deal. And that's what he told me when that horse fell on me in the creek. He said, I didn't think you was going to get up from that, Dad. Anyhow, as we went on down the hill, and it's like my right shoulder started getting stiff on me. Next morning, I couldn't lift my shoulder. I couldn't lift my arm, only I couldn't lift it. No way I couldn't lift it straight up. I could only lift it a little bit. Anyway, it was stiff like that. But anyway, I went for several months and couldn't lift that arm. I mean, it was just, it'd go so high, and that was it. You couldn't force it up. So when John, we was up 6 Mile chasing lions with the hound dogs, and they'd treat a lion in a tree up in the ledges. And so John and I was up there in the ledges, and we was going around the side hill, and it was froze to get to where the dogs was. And I was just right below John. There was the hill was steep, and it was froze. So I started going around there, and I started sliding down that hill. And so I started looking for a place to land, because if I went over that ledge, it wasn't real high. But John thought I was going to go over the ledge, and he reached down and grabbed my right arm and jerked on it. And that caused me, I fell down, and he held onto my arm, and that right arm shot up in the air. And man, you talk about pain. Holy cow, that sucker hurt. And he grabbed my arm and jerked on that thing, and it hurt for a while. By golly, after that, I could move that arm in any position. I mean, it was it.
That's all it took, huh?
That's all it took, and I don't know what locked it up, but whatever he did. But it was all bruised the next day,
Yeah.
But whatever he did, he fixed my arm. I mean, he was always saying something about he's going to send me a chiropractor bill for fixing my arm. But
no kidding.
But but that was. Them are some of the ones I could feel. And then I remember one time my little brother and I, we was hunting deer, and he had a Jeep, and we was in his Jeep, and it was just raining like crazy. I mean, it was pouring rain, and we was coming off the mountain. He backed up on a switchback on a road and backed up over a quakey tree and couldn't get out from under it. Couldn't get over it again. So I jumped out and hurried and grabbed the handyman jack and jacked the Jeep up and pulled the tree out, and I went to let the jack down. And when you let them handymans down, you're holding all the weight, as they go down. My hand was all muddy, and I was kind of careless, and I was letting that Jeep down, and that jack handle slipped out of my hand, and the handle is an inch pipe, and that jack handle slipped out of my hand and flipped up and hit me right in the side of the temple right there, and it cracked hard. I mean, it popped. And boy, talk about hurting. The handle flipped over the top of the Jeep, come out of the jack. I went around there and got it and finished jacking the Jeep down, and my head was hurting so bad. And it didn't knock me out, but it probably felt better if it had. But anyway, my little brother looked at me and he said, holy cow, he said, you got a hole in the side of your head. And I said, boy, that jack handle just hit me. And then I started getting sick. So anyway, we came down off the mountain, and my pickup was there, and we had a tow bar on that Jeep, and we hooked it up. I said, you'll have to drive. I said, I'm getting sick. So we came down the mountain. He took me to the emergency, or we stopped by where my wife was at her sister's place, and he took me to the emergency room he's in the Cottonwood Hospital up to Salt Lake, because we'd hunting up east of Salt Lake. And we walked in there, and this was midnight by then, and we was mud from head to foot. We walked in there, and he told the nurse, said, "Can I help you guys?" And he says, "Yeah." He said, "I just whacked this guy upside the head with a piece of pipe, and he needs to get looked at." And she looked at me, and she said, "Oh, my word, you go sit down." So I went and sit down. So I sat there, and I was hurting. And pretty soon the doctor came in, and he said, "Boy," and he said, "We got to take you and get an x-ray right quick." So they took me and x-rayed me, and then he told me what was the matter, and it had caved the bones in on this side of my head. And he told me, he said, "Really?" He said, "That should have killed you." He said, "Where you got hit like that and what it did," he said, "it should have just flat killed you." So they got a plastic surgeon, and he said, "Well, I'll operate on you the next morning. He said, 8 o'clock in the morning, I'll be back here." So he did, and he fixed me, and he pushed bones. He cut me in my eyebrow and under my eye, and then reached the tools in there, and he pushed the bones back out in place and put some stainless steel in there to hold them. And so to this day, I got stainless steel in the side of my head.
Jeez.
But anyway, that guy must have been good, because I never had a headache from it.
Yeah.
After he fixed me. Looked like I'd been in an arena with some boxer. My face was swelled up flat,
Jeez.
But that was a pretty close call.
Talk to me about your experience becoming a father, how that changed your life.
Oh, that changed our life. My wife and I, we was like 24 when we got married. And we tried for a couple of years to get kids and couldn't. And my wife said, "Well, let's adopt one then." So we started talking about that. And then she come home one day, and she'd been to the doctor, and she says, "Guess what?" And I said, "What?" And she says, "We're going to have a baby." So we thought good about that. So anyway, things went good, and she and I went home one night after work, and she said, "I got to go to the hospital." And when I'd left work, I was mechanicing then for Cox construction company there in Manti. And the boss had asked me when I left work, he said, "Would you go to the quarry tonight?" He says, "Their D9 over there's the turbo's getting hot." And he said, "Would you go see if you can figure it out?" And I said, "Okay." So I threw some tools in my pickup, and I headed home, and then I was going to go right over there. And my wife says, "I got to go to the hospital." So I said, "Okay." So we loaded her in the hospital. They're in the pickup and headed for the hospital. It was in Mount Pleasant then. And we got to the hospital, and I still had my work clothes on. And we got to the hospital, and I packed her suitcase in. She went in the hospital, and the nurses took care of her, and they took her to a room, and I left her suitcase, and I said, "I'll see you. I got to run and do this." So I run out, got in my truck, went around the Nephi and back down towards Levan where the cat was at that gyp quarry. I went up there and worked on that cat for, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours, and got done. And I was greased from clear to my armpits. And so I went down to Gunnison, back around home there, and stopped and cleaned up. Went to the hospital, and she hadn't had the baby yet. But man, when I went in that hospital, those nurses laid into me, man, they was gonna, if it had been legal to kill somebody, they'd have killed me. They thought I was the lowest form of life for just bringing my wife in there and just leaving her. And so anyway, when she was still in heavy labor, so I was there, and when the baby was born, and it was John, he was our first one, and we was pretty tickled about that. And so anyway, we took him home, and we blessed him. We used to have 3 churches there in Manti. There was a north ward, and center ward, and a south ward, and each ward had their own building. But the church condemned the old north ward building that we was in, and so the very last Sunday that we met in that building before we had to go to one of the others was the day that we blessed John, and he was the last one. And anyway, and then we got Gina. And I mean, your whole life changes when you get kids. I mean, those kids are pretty much the boss, it seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just, and gives you more purpose in life, And I mean, just, it was awesome to have kids. And then, so we had John and then 3 girls. I remember one time, John, he'd had all the attention, I mean, he was a kingpin, and then when Gina came home, kind of deflated him a little bit. And he had a cork gun. He had a cork gun that he'd shoot corks, And when Gina was in the other room, and one day John came out of his bedroom and taking long steps, and he had his cork gun. And I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going in there and shoot that baby." But he finally grew out of that. It didn't take him too long. And then the other girls came along, but it just changed your life. I mean, gives you purpose, and you have to just change the way you live.
Yeah. Did you ever have any doubts, like, am I providing enough for my family? Am I being a good dad? Am I teaching them what they need to know?
Yeah. Sometimes I remember when Gina was little, we never learned how to be parents until we got girls. Because John, he was so easy to deal with, He'd go with me everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, that kid had been on the top of most of these high mountains by the time he was 4 years old, because I'd haul him on a backpack or put him on the horse and just take him, all the time. And then Gina, and he was easy. When Gina came along, she was harder to deal with, just a different personality. And we'd been getting after quite a bit for different things. One day she asked, I think my wife was there, she asked my wife, she says, "Do I ever do anything right?" And that was pretty sobering. So we had to kind of open her eyes to things like that,
Yeah.
And you wonder. I never did worry about providing stuff for them, because we never really, when I was a little kid, I mean, we did without all the time, but me and my wife, we always had pretty much what we needed and that, and the kids did, but it changes your life. It sobers you up. You gotta.
Yeah. Some people say you can't really become a man until you have kids.
Yeah, and I always said, well, what you say is right. I always looked at other people and see what some of their kids were doing, and I thought, man, if that was my kid, I'd wail the tar out of him.
Yeah.
But when we got kids and started seeing, that every one of them's different.
Yeah.
Had to backtrack a little bit on some things that I said I'd do that I didn't do. And, and you do have to change your ways.
Yeah. So if you could go back in time and talk to yourself at 30 years old, what would you tell yourself?
Well, I'd be kinder to my kids. And I'd be kinder to my kids, and I did spend a lot of time with them when they was little, especially John, and I used to take Gina a lot too, and Darla. Diana, not so much. She always said if you'd buy me a sorrel horse, I'd go with you horseback riding. But she was a little bit scared of him. So I bought her the prettiest little sorrel horse she ever seen. I think she only rode it a couple times. But I'd do more with them, and I'd be more gentle with them. Because I was afraid sometimes I was pushing them away from me instead of, not John so much, but the girls.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know how to deal with girls.
Yeah.
But that's what I'd have done that. I'd have been kinder to them and not so strong-headed.
What satisfaction do you feel from watching your grandkids now grow up and create family and have a successful life?
Oh, grandkids are the goods. Grandkids are the goods. I mean, you'd like to tell them more and like to advise them more, and you can to a certain extent. I mean, you just feel good when you see your grandkids do good, and when you see some of them that's not doing so good, that have pushed away from you and wanted to rebel. It's hard to do that. I mean, I've seen, you take there's like Katie and LeGrand. What I've seen, I mean, look what Katie's made out of herself, and look what LeGrand's accomplished, and like Dallin, I've been able to, because Dallin lives close to me, I've been able to spend a lot more time with Dallin, and I've hauled him all over the country to wrestling tournaments and football, and done a ton of. I've gone backpacking, with him and Jace a lot, and just done a lot. And Dallin and I, we rebuilt engines and stuff and put them in. When he was a little bitty kid, I'd be working on something in the shop, and he'd get under there and he'd rolling around the grease, and he thought he was in heaven, because I'd let him do stuff, but he's the one that I'm probably the closest to, just because I've been around him the most. But Jace, just awesome kid too.
Yeah.
And John's kids are, and Darla's girls. I was close to them for a lot, and Gina's kids till he moved away. But to see your grandkids excel and do good and stuff, it just does you a lot of good.
Yeah. Has your life played out pretty much how you thought it would?
Yeah. I you know, I'm in favor of kids. You like to see your kids and your grandkids get educated, and do stuff, good stuff. But I went to college a couple of years, but I never, and I'm not saying it didn't help me, because it did, but what I went to college for, never done. Probably used more of it than I realized, but I'd made up my mind when I was younger. Well, I liked farming, but then I got mechanicing, and I liked to do that, and so I did that for 50 years, along with the farming and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But and I've stayed active in the church, and I'm not saying I'm good, but I've stayed active in it, and that's meant as much to me as a lot. And I went on a mission, and when I think about it, if I hadn't have gone on a mission, a person don't know what they miss until they go on a mission and come home and then think back about it. What if I hadn't have done that?
Yeah.
That'd have been the hole that couldn't have been filled any other way.
Yeah.
That's one of the highlights. Although it was hard, and I went to a big city, and I wasn't a city person, that's for sure. In fact, when I got my mission call, they asked me when I filled out the papers, will you go wherever you're asked? And I said, I'll go any place but a big city. And I'll be danged when I got the mission call, it said, you're called to the Eastern States Mission, and the mission headquarters is 973 Fifth Avenue, Manhattan Island, New York. Oh, I stomped around the house for several days about that. Finally, my dad told me, he was the bishop then, he says, you gotta let them know if you're going or you ain't going. So I said, I guess I'll go. So I did. And as hard as it was, I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing there to replace it.
As you've grown older, how has your perspective of gratitude changed?
Oh, a lot. I mean, gratitude, a person that don't have gratitude, I mean, they're just, I seen a quote about that the other day, and I thought, man, that really fits, and I can't remember what it was. It was I think it was by Elder Holland. I can't remember, wish I could remember it, but
yeah.
A person without gratitude, when I think back and I start thinking, I've got so much gratitude for just tons more than I used to, for my parents and my grandparents. And I was always around my dad and my grandpa and my grandma and my mom. And then my dad's younger brother, Clyde. I was around him a lot. And when I think about him, I didn't have that gratitude at the time when I was younger, but I'll tell you, I sure got it now. And I think about just tons and tons and tons of people that I've associated with, and I feel the gratitude for them and what they've done,
Yeah.
and grandkids and kids and just people in general,
Yeah. Well, I ask all my guests the same question, the last question. And that is, if there's one lesson you want to leave with your family when you're no longer here, what's that lesson?
To have gratitude and to stay close to the church and to stay close to the Lord, And I mean have him in your life, because what we have when we leave this life, I mean, eternity is a long time. It's a long time. And so what we do here has a really whole lot to do with what we do there. And so just do good. I mean, be good, live good, and do good, Do good to others. And to appreciate what people do for you, and appreciate what the Lord does for you. And that, if I was to tell my grandkids, that's what I'd tell them, is to stay close to the Lord, and stay close to the church, and stay close to your parents, your family, because that's about all you have.
Yeah.
That's of any value,
Yeah.
Association with other people too is valuable, but your family and stay close to the Lord to me, that'd be the most important thing.
Awesome. Well, thanks for letting me talk to you a little bit, and thanks for sharing your thoughts and stories. I really appreciate it.